Earlier this month, a proposal to restructure the Minneapolis Police Department was rejected by voters, raising the question, is there still support for the Defund the Police movement, or was there ever?
While the movement made headlines in the wake of George Floyd's murder, activists in Baltimore have been sounding the alarm for nearly a decade. Journalist Brian Charles spent most of the summer following Baltimore's defund movement. He joins us now to share his reporting. Welcome, Brian.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys.
Right, so at the national level, the question that pundits seem to be concerned with is what the effect is of Republicans' ability to weaponize the slogan on, say, House or Senate Democrats or on Joe Biden. But at the local level, there are real people who are engaged with the question of police budgets, and you've been following this in Baltimore. You know, where is the energy on that question now, and how have you seen it evolve since Freddie Gray's killing in 2015?
So what was effectively a very grassroots kind of movement to put pressure on City Hall looked like it was about to get some political legitimacy with the election of Brandon Scott. Scott was a city council member, grew up in a section of Baltimore that's heavily affected by a lot of gun violence. But he also was a person that started to question whether or not policing was the way forward to reduce the number of homicides. Baltimore now is in its seventh consecutive year of 300 plus homicides. That's for a city of roughly just under 600,000. And he, when he won, people said, okay, maybe we're in the position to do that. And he immediately, after winning the primary, there's no real Republican challenger here. He was city council president, and he moved to get $22 million taken out of the police budget. So it looked like this was going in the right direction. And then the homicide spike that hit all over the country didn't spare Baltimore. We hit what has become our more annual average for the last couple of years. We had 335 homicides in 2020, and a lot of gun violence, a lot of non-fatal shootings. And it seemed like the political will for that evaporated. And he seemed to be not as, he actually supported putting $28 million back into the police budget. So that kind of, I would say the movement still has legs though here, because the police, the mayor still says, hey, listen, we still spend too much money on policing. We need to kind of deal with that. We spend $900 per person per capita on policing, the highest in the country.
Right, and are not getting a favorable result, right? It's one thing to say we need to spend more on, but if you're spending that much, then you expect something to actually being done about the problem. But I do think, I think the slogan, it's pretty inarguable. The slogan, defund the police, has been, as Ryan was saying, toxic in a sort of national sense in many races. How are activists trying to shift the conversation to be more about, I think police accountability is perhaps a more useful term, or, putting the resources in different places, but, not obviously doing away with the idea that there is going to be policing, because there does have to be some policing because there is crime and crime is increasing.
So the movement here has a couple of different fronts within the movement. It's not a monolith. Right. So if you were to talk to, and you read the story, we talked to a guy named Ray Kelly. Ray Kelly is a longtime activist here. He believes that policing has a role within the city, but the fact is that we need to look at police budgets, and we need to reallocate some of that money to social services, to education, to housing, to addiction services. I mean, we have one of the largest open drug markets in the country. In Baltimore. Some would actually argue it is the largest open drug market in the country. And so there needs to be some things to address that. We need a jobs program, as some have argued. Kelly would be one of them. That's a little bit different from some other parts of that coalition, who has long said that we need to abolish police, that police don't need to exist at all. The thing that everybody in that coalition agrees with is the fact that individual neighborhoods need to be able to decide what policing looks like in their neighborhood, and they need to be educated and have a seat at the table in what they would call participatory budgeting processes. So the idea is that police budgets just routinely go up year to year with very little argument. I mean, think about the difference between a police budget every year and some places that hold literally ballot initiatives and referendums on school budgets, right? Like everyone gets to say what the school budget is. But the fact is we don't do that with policing. And I mean, in this city, we spent $555 million on the police department. But last year, we saw a cut to education spending last year. At the same time that the state of Maryland is holding cities like Baltimore accountable for constitutionally funding, giving adequate funding to education, we cut education funding. So yeah, that's the argument.
And what has the police interaction been? What's been the police response to the pressure? Are they happy that they've been able to push Mayor Scott into restoring some of the funding, or do they still consider him to be kind of a hostile actor?
Yeah, the FOP here wants to basically say that yes, he's a hostile actor because he basically meets with these folks, right? Like he's willing to sit down. So the folks that are in that coalition are folks that Mayor Scott meets with on a regular basis to talk about what the future of policing looks like. We have another issue at hand, which is local control of our police department. It's a little more complicated for this segment, but that's a thing that some of those people from Defund are on that commission, so he meets with them again. That's something that the police department doesn't want for a lot of reasons. So, this is also a police department, I want to say to you, is under a federal consent decree, which the rank and file police officers don't like.
And which is very expensive too, right?
Loves. It is very expensive, and it's actually one of the things that is another part of this defund story that's really intricate, which is the consent decree makes the idea of defunding police difficult because you have a federal judge who has said there's some values in the defund that I agree with, that we need to have some resources for other parts of the city, but we can't defund now because we still have to reform the police department. So this isn't a case where the reform movement, ostensibly a progressive movement, is in conflict with aspects of defund because the reform movement requires money to fund it, right? It needs to have money to fund the reforms that are needed to make the police department constitutionally be able to execute constitutional policing. The defund folks look at this and say, well, this is just cover because you don't want to really deal with the real problem, which is these guys will continue and women will continue to come into our neighborhoods and create problems within our neighborhoods, and that the police department is stealing resources from one part of the city and spending it on whatever the police department needs to spend it on, and not giving us the result that we want. Right? That's the argument.
Yeah, and you've also reported on what Mayor Scott has been doing to, instead of defunding the police, what he's been doing to try to improve public safety. And it sounds like a lot of what he's trying are the kind of new versions of things that we've heard from before. So how are activists responding to that, and what is the mayor's plan?
So the mayor, it's funny, I had a story just dropped this morning on the mayor's plan to come back with what is a focused deterrence plan. This is what you're showing right now is a story about the politics of it from the summer. The mayor has engaged with the White House, and the White House has some money put into the ARPA funding, which would allow cities to spend money on non-law enforcement violence or non-law enforcement violence interruption, which is basically groups of violence interrupters, people who go out and talk to people on the front lines of that violence, get them to mediate conflicts, people who can go out and counsel and mentor young men, because it's mostly young men and teenage boys that are driving most of the violence in the city, about, getting away from the particular lifestyles, particular actions that put them in danger, and then hooking them up with things like job skills and other things that can get them into the legitimate economy, what there is of a legitimate economy here. And that is a part of what Scott has called a public health approach. He was able to tap into $50 million from the federal government to help fund this. He's got some local philanthropic help on this. He's got some money, obviously, from the city on this. That is what he is kind of hanging his hat on, that he's going to be, that it's not an either or solution. It's a both and for right now. But the signal is, trust me, eventually we'll get to the point where we won't be spending more than any other city on policing.
J. Brian Charles, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, guys.
And stick around. We'll have more Rising right after this.